running unit tests has always been pretty easy, but there's still that little bit of a delay where you have to go and click run unit tests or fire some keyboard shortcut. Wouldn't it be nice if Visual Studio could kind of watch what you were doing and run tests as you wrote them? Let's mash on that. Hi everybody, and welcome to another episode of the ASP.NET Monsters. In today's episode, we're going to take a look at this fantastic little tool that exists in Visual Studio Enterprise called Live Unit Testing. So I have set up here a basic sort of project. In Visual Studio, I've got a website and I have a service test down here in my unit test project. So I'm using XUnit because it's awesome, but you could probably use MSTest if you were particularly sadistic. So in order to get this running, I installed XUnit and I installed the xunit.runners or .runner.visual studio in my dependencies here. I have yellow triangles on them, I'm not sure why, but everything works, so we'll just ignore the yellow triangles for now. So anyway, I have set up a service here, which is called a pickle service, and I have added 3 different pickles for it to return, and I'm going to write some tests around it. In theory, I could be writing my tests first, but I guess we won't do that for today. So right now you can see that I have a not implemented exception being thrown here, and I have a failed test as a result of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this live unit, or this unit test project here. I'm going to right click on it. I'm going to go down to this menu item called live test, and I'm going to click include. So that includes the tests that exist inside the unit test project, inside the set of tests that Visual Studio is monitoring to know when it needs to run tests. And the reason that you have to go and explicitly include tests is because if you had a bunch of, say, integration tests or a bunch of longer running tests you might not want to run live, then you wouldn't necessarily want to include them. And the more tests that you include, the higher the workload on Visual Studio, because it has to monitor more things for changes, to do calculations about what tests it needs to run. So anyway, let's go switch my output here into live unit testing. And this is just going to be the output of the live unit testing as it runs. So what I'm going to do is I want to make this test pass, first of all. So I'm just going to remove that exception there. And I haven't actually hit save or anything yet. So live unit testing, it's going to monitor the files in memory, and even if I haven't saved the files to disk yet, it's going to go and execute the test. You can see already that my test has now started to pass just because I removed that particular item there. So let's go and implement.
Check it in, we're done.
Test. Sometimes tests need to actually do things. So let's see. Should return list with at least 3 items. Okay, and then we'll go and hook this thing up. So you can see it's already starting to run the tests again behind the scenes for me, and it's picked up on that name change on the test. So let's go and write a test here. View pickle service. I'll just add a reference for that. And we'll do set dot, what did I call it? Get pickles? Get types. It's not confusing at all with get types. Excellent name.
It's super confusing.
I'm going to do a set dot true. I don't usually use this assertion library, so bear with me while I get it wrong. Dot count greater than 2. Alright, so in theory that should work nicely. And if you take a look at the output down here, you can see that it's completed its build and successfully run 1 test. So let's add another test here real quick. And we'll do should contain dill. So we want to make sure that at least one of these pickle types contains dill. So what do we do here?
Better, 'cause it's the only type of pickle that really matters.
Yeah, it's true. Contains. What capitalization I use on that? Will also be a good test if it fails. Okay, so let's see if that even passes here now. I'm curious to see. So, build completed, succeeded, and we'll just wait 1 second here to see if the test passes. Executing 2 tests. Oh, looks like it failed. Let's see why that failed. So suspecting true, but it got false, probably because I have capitalization difference there. So that's pretty cool. So now I've got to admit I haven't changed the tests, but I've changed the code that the tests rely upon. And live unit testing has detected that, and it's gone and rerun the tests now. So that's pretty
cool.
nifty. And it's smart enough that if I go and I add like some new class here, then it's not going to go and rerun those tests necessarily, because it knows that just adding this class here is not going to have an impact on the tests that exist inside the pickle service. So you see, it didn't actually bother to go and try and run any tests at the end of this. It just went and added them. But if I added something else that changed the pickle service, it would go back and run it again.
That's really cool. The source code analysis behind that must be pretty interesting.
Yeah, so I mean, there have been services like this that have existed in the past, like plugins that you could put into Visual Studio. nCrunch does it, and I always call it Mighty Moose, but I think when they shipped it, they called it something else. But this was a Greg Young's project from a couple of years ago.
Right.
But I really like it. I think it really speeds up my development, because I don't have to go and run unit tests or write unit tests, or I don't have to like go and click anything to interrupt my workflow to go and run these unit tests. And sometimes it'll be really good because it will detect dependencies that I either didn't know existed or I'd forgotten existed or something like that. Whereas what I would normally do with the test is I would kind of like go and write the test, and I go and run my little shortcut here to go and run just this test, not realizing that, hey, maybe I broke this test up here, or I broke some test that was 6 files away because of some change that I wasn't quite anticipating. So I think that's great.
There was a feature that I used to use quite a bit before this, that on the test explorer there's a button that tells it to auto run.
Yeah,
I think the one just to the left. Yeah.
Build.
So anytime you build your project, it will rerun all your tests for you, which is pretty handy. But if you have a lot of tests, and some of them are integration tests, like you were saying, or there's situations where it wasn't ideal and it still took a long time to get that feedback that you had broken something, this is way more instant and more directed at just running the tests that are effective. So it's really cool.
Yeah, really my only complaint with it is that I don't feel like it surfaces errors very well. So if you start writing a bunch of stuff, like if you make a bunch of changes at a time, you can see that it might run several builds before it gets around to actually running a test sweep through. And I don't, like, I'm never sure if like the build and test that's running right now is the most up-to-date one. Because I can make a change like this, which is going to break it, and then it's going to go and kick off the test. So then I make the change, it fixes it. And so for a minute, this test is failing. I'm like, it should be passing, but it's failing over here. What's going on? So I would like the test explorer window to kind of have tighter integration with live unit testing, to sort of like, hey, we ran this test and it failed, but we've already detected there's another test run that needs to be run on top of this one. So
at least
I'm going to gray out the red a little bit or something. Yeah,
invalidate the past one and indicate that it's still running, still trying to figure out if it's broken or not, kind of thing. Are you concerned at all about the noise it adds to your code editor? Have you found that to be distracting?
No, not really. I guess I have this window up which I wouldn't normally have up. Like I would normally have the Test Explorer up, but I wouldn't necessarily have the output window up, at least not on the live unit test. So there is that's added to it. And I think if just like the Test Explorer window integrated live unit testing a little bit better, I wouldn't even need to have that. So I'm not too upset about it. But yeah, I do find myself having to kind of like come to the output a little bit more. And if you have something that fails to run, like just fails to build completely, then the output in here is just, it's useless for me. The build
it passed but failed. Interesting.
Right. So then I have to come over and take a look at the actual errors and see, well, why did that build actually fail? So it would be nice if it was a little bit bigger and more omnipresent. I'm a big fan of CodeRush, and it used to be that if you try and run a test, I don't know if it's still like that anymore. But if you tried to run a test through their test runner and your build was failing, it was pretty obvious that the build had failed. So it would have in like, it doesn't do it anymore, unfortunately. But it used to have in like size 70 font right across here. Build failed. So
the Visual Studio team should add that then, the size 70 point font.
Yeah, sometimes I would like to have size 70.
You have failed.
But I know that the team is continuing to work on this, and that I think that probably the integration with the environment in general will be something that they work on improving.
I'm surprised that it works with just anything. Like you're using XUnit here, and that's not a Microsoft thing.
Yeah, so it's really nice because I think it just ties in with kind of like the unit testing inside Visual Studio. So I haven't talked with the XUnit team, but I suspect that this just kind of worked for them.
Yeah.
Because once they had their integration with Visual Studio working, that the integration with the live unit test runner was nothing.
That's nice.
Yeah.
So there was a time for sure when they would have released a new feature like this, and it would have only worked with MS Test.
Yep, that's for sure true.
So it's cool to see it work with XUnit and NUnit and whatever you want to use, as long as it has a Visual Studio test runner, which I don't think is a really hard thing for the test frameworks to implement now. They all have one at least, so must not be too hard.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks everybody for watching another episode of the ASP.NET Monsters. Remember to like, comment, and share, and we will read every comment. Those of which are mean, we cry a little bit when we read them.
It's true.
But if we read your comment on the air, we will send you a handy dandy sticker, just like Dave is holding up right there.
Look how shiny that is.
That's just fabulous. You don't even need to do a lens flare effect for that.
No.
All right. Well, we'll see everybody on the next episode. Thanks for watching.
Bye.